Unbelievable. Cool. I think we're actually up on multiple things in multiple places. This is around the internet. And we'll share the stuff here. All right. Cool. Give it about a minute here for everyone to come online. You all can see the slides, right?
Yes.
Very good. Very good. What I need is some elevator music to just like fill in the background. I've got it. I've got the wiring hooked up. I could do it, but I'm not sure what my legal rights are. Streaming pirate radio from Germany to the US might get me a visit from TSA when I try to go into the country next time.
Actually, a friend of mine had a product up on Product Hunt called and whenever the Zoom meeting got silent, it would just automatically play the elevator music. You can check it out. It's just UHMMM.
All right. I like it. I like it. Do you know what I also like? I like kicking off community call, and that is what we're going to do. It is top of the hour. Sometimes I like to wait, but on community call, no, we keep this thing, as the Germans say, kurz und knackig, which means short and crispy, basically. So that doesn't translate super well, but we're going to go ahead and start. My name is Jesse Martin. I am definitely a new face to community call, but I will probably be a face you'll see more often this year. I will be leading these up this coming year, so it is nice to see all of you. And yeah, welcome to the new year of community calls. Super excited about it. And to kick it off, we've got a pretty sick agenda for the day, which I'm pretty excited about. We've got a update on nested types, which if you're tracking so far on all of the work around nested types, this is big. Like, this is really big. So I'm super excited about this feature and excited to see what the current work there is. We also have then SQL in the sequel. I'm proud of that title. I came up with that. But basically, you're going to see some of the nerdiest ways to use Hasura, the most meta way possible to handle some extremely interesting use cases, and generally about the event transforms, which is a very powerful utility for any kind of work inside of Hasura. Beyond that, we have the updates to the Kriti lang, which I like to say, you know, what do Haskell devs do when they need to come up with a templating language? They write a new one. So that's what we have here. And we're going to see the updates to this really powerful spec, actually, that's going to enable a lot of these features you see today. And then lastly, we have our community contribution today from Hossein, which is going to be actually really interesting on a social media platform for getting things done, healthy living. It's going to be really interesting. So I'm excited about that as well. And without any further ado, as people start to flood in, we're going to go ahead and kick it off and start with the first video contribution from our coworker, David, that is about nested types and actions. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get this started here. And we'll see if this, in fact, streams audio. So I'll be watching for a couple of thumbs up here in a minute to see if audio is coming through. Give it a second.
Hi, my name's David. I'm a backend developer at Hasura. Today I'm going to be talking about a new feature, which is nested output objects in actions. So to describe this new feature, I'm going to use a small example here. Here's a little JavaScript server I've created, and it just returns a single object in the response. It has a name field, an address field, and the address field itself is an object containing city and country. We can run that and just get the response back like this. So we'd like to be able to use this as a query field in GraphQL. So we can add it to some action in Hasura. And I've done just that here, this user action. The only problem is until recently that we had a limitation where you couldn't have nested objects in the response. So instead of having that address type described as a GraphQL object type, we had to just describe it as JSON there, which does work. You can see in the API here, we can run a query with the name and address, and we get back the full address object, but we don't get any way of selecting subfields that address. We don't, GraphQL doesn't know any type of information about what might be in that JSON object. So that's kind of a limitation. Fortunately, we have recently fixed that. So if I can show you how we do that now. With this new nested user type, we're using the same webhook here, but different types. So now it returns a nested user type, and the address type is no longer JSON. It's now a new GraphQL output object, which contains the city and country. If I go back to the API and show the nested result, we see here we can actually select subfields within the address. So we might just want to see the country, but not the city. We run that and we get the country back. So that's it so far. One current limitation with this is that we don't currently allow relationships to be added on the nested fields. So for example, you couldn't add a relationship on this country field at the moment, but that's something we're working on at the moment, and hopefully that's a limitation that won't be around for too long. All right, thank you for your time today.
All right, so that was the contribution about nested actions. It was a rather quick demo, so if there's any questions, I would just want to throw this out right now. Feel free to put those in the chat. We'll have a little bit of time at the end to address those, maybe pre-pen which feature the question is related to, and we will try to get to those as in order. There's also, we're streaming this live today on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch, and there are other places to leave questions. I will do my best to catch them there, but the best place to leave questions is here inside of the Zoom chat. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next feature, which is event transforms. We have another video for the intro half of this feature by Abhijit. And then Tanmay is going to add some more context about how this feature behaves. So without any further ado, we will go ahead and grab the next video.
Hi, my name's David. I'm a backend developer at Hasura. Today I'm going to...
All right, event trigger transforms.
Hello folks, let's talk about event trigger transforms. Let's say I have an event trigger and I'm triggering it using some operations, and I have a webhook which expects the data in a certain format. Now what used to happen was my trigger used to send the payload in a specific format, which is shown here, and I had to use some third-party sources to convert that data, or I had to convert that data within my webhook itself. Now what we can do is we can convert this data within the Hasura console itself. So this is the screenshot of Hasura console, and this sample input is what the payload would be, right? And we will use a templating language to convert that data into into the format that we need. So now the diagram looks like this, where we have the data, we convert it within our console using the transforms, and we get the data. The data which will be sent to the webhook will be in the format that we need it to be. It's a pretty useful feature, and I'll be showing the demo of how to do this now. So I'll try to create an event trigger now. Let's go to create section. Let's say new trigger. I'll keep the default database. I'll select the public schema, and I select the users table. Now we'll trigger on the insert operations. And for webhook, I have this code sandbox, which this is the base path, and at /users, it just outputs the data that it gets from the payload, so that we can see what data are we getting from Hasura. So it will output it here in the terminal, right? And then this base path for this, it's stored in my webhook env, and basically what we'll need is /users path, and we'll show how to transform it into using the transformations to meet our needs. So let's say I'll use it here, and now I need to open the request options transform, which will basically allow me to transform the URL. And when I go here, it says missing env, right? So the Hasura console does not have access to that env, because env could contain sensitive information and will not expand those env. But for the purpose of if I save it right now, it will work. But for the preview is not working. So for the purpose of making this preview work, there is a sample context section where the users could add their env pairs, and they could add mock env pairs just for the sake of making this preview work and seeing like how will their transformed URL would look like, right? So I'll add something here. I'll just add test.com, and we can see that the URL comes in here, right? And I need to transform it to /users, right? And this is good. Now we need the body. Let's say I need a table name and I need the data. Right, this table name, and I'll get the data from body.event. As you can see, there's also an autocomplete which gets keywords from the sample input section, and it gives you an autocomplete feature. So .data.new, this should work. This will this is basically the payload that will be sent to my webhook, right? Now if I want to change something, right, like if I want to delete and update operations, and I want my sample input to be representative of that, then I can hit this reset button, and then it will update the sample input, and you can use it accordingly in the request body section, right? But this is good enough for now. We'll go ahead and create this trigger, new trigger, and let's go to the data tab. Let's go to the users table, and let's try to insert something and see if our trigger works. Right, first name first, last name last. If I save it, if I go to my webhook now, we can see that the data comes, and this is the new data, and then the table name comes, and this is the transformed data that we have.
All right. So that is the demo portion of it. And Tanmay is going to add a little bit of additional color and kind of show a little bit more about how that actually goes into practice. So Tanmay, floor is yours.
Thank you, folks. All right. So let's see. Let me just share my screen, and I'll bring up a few cool things that we've been doing or we've been thinking about with this. So let me just share my screen here. All right, let me know if you folks can see. Cool. So we looked at kind of event triggers and kind of what it lets you do, right? And you saw that this ability that you can kind of go into event triggers, configure that, and then you're able to kind of execute and run against webhooks without having to transform the payload in some kind of middleware lambda that you'd have to usually write. So we introduced this for actions first. And so that kind of made it easy for us to bring in kind of GraphQL APIs or bring in existing REST APIs into our actions pretty easily. and via actions bring that into our GraphQL API pretty easily with that transformer. We then kind of brought in the same templating thing into event triggers, which is what Abhijit just demoed. And so you kind of see that here, where you can kind of go in and set up event trigger transformations, right? And this is neat. I'll take kind of two interesting examples of where we can, of where event triggers become useful. One is pretty obvious, where if you have an event trigger, and usually the first example that people often think of is if something happens, send an email. And so you'll see an example with SendGrid, and you should be able to run that example and try that out as well. So whenever there's an event that happens, what this does is you can kind of set it up with an API key. And once you have the API key, you can have an event trigger that directly shoots off an email via SendGrid. So you don't have to have a middleware kind of thing in the middle, like a Lambda that takes Hasura's event trigger, converts that into SendGrid's API call, and then call SendGrid. You can just directly call SendGrid from Hasura. So this is kind of what that metadata looks like. If you view the metadata underlying kind of what is happening on the console, you see an event trigger definition that is there for an insert on the user model, and you're seeing that it's going to call the SendGrid API directly. And there's a transformation here that converts our event payload, which is the user object, right, into kind of the transformation or into the body that SendGrid's API will expect. Right, so that's the kind of you should be able to try this out very easily. You'll find this on Hasura/Data Hub, where we're starting to collect a bunch of these examples. So you'll find this on Data Hub as well. So try it out, and if of course we have any ideas for other kinds of examples that you tried out or that you want to see, just feel free to open up an issue on Data Hub or on GraphQL Engine itself. So that's kind of one example of what you can do with event triggers. There's another example. Another interesting thing that you can do with the ability to kind of call anything from an event trigger or a cron trigger, and that's kind of what I'll just step into next. So if you think about kind of the we've often had this thing when you're kind of using event triggers, you want to clean up kind of event data, right? So let me just take an example. Oops. Right, Hasura event trigger, right? And so let's say, for example, you want to run an operation that kind of cleans out event triggers, right? When they at a certain interval, let's say every day you want to clean out all the invocation logs and stuff like that, because millions of invocation logs have happened, and you want to clean that out. Now, what you would have had to do is like run this SQL, which basically cleans out the event trigger log. With whatever frequency, right? So you would have had to set it up. Now what you can do is you can use Hasura's cron triggers to run the SQL against Hasura to clean up those event triggers directly, right? And so, by the way, this is something you want to be very, very careful with and not kind of like use it very often. But let me just take you over what that looks like, right? So what I've done here in this example is I've set up a user model, right? I'm just going to add some things here. So let's say name 6, name 7, name 8, name 9, right? And this kind of creates events as you would expect, right? So we have a bunch of events that just happened that are kind of correlated to the insert events that I just did, right? And that kind of results in certain these are the invocation logs that Hasura has captured, right? So these are the events that I just created with, name 5, name 6, name 7, whatever. And so these event logs just got created. What I've also now done is I've added a cron trigger that basically runs the cleanup SQL back against Hasura itself. And then that kind of cleans this up every minute, right? So we'll see this kind of, this event log data getting cleaned up every minute. And so I'll just show you what the underlying SQL looks like. This is what it looks like. I added a cron trigger here, and the cron trigger uses the same transformation technique, this is using PrettyLang, right? And what it's doing is it's actually just calling back to the same Hasura instance and running this SQL to delete from the invocation logs, right? So I'm kind of able to kind of run that back against Hasura to run kind of these kinds of things. So I could use this for things like, refreshing materialized views if I need to, right? Running any kind of batch things that I want to, cleaning up events is one example, and kind of doing stuff like that. So The thing to be careful about here, though, is that if you start realizing what you can also do, because this is pretty lang, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, you can also start to template the SQL inside this, right? So you can kind of start parameterizing it and start running parameterized SQL queries, but that becomes really dangerous. And we'll kind of when we document this, we'll talk about this so that you want to be really careful in kind of exposing that, because that might lead to kind of SQL injection type things if you're not being careful about how you're passing the parameter in. So if you start realizing that you're kind of doing more advanced versions of this, an approach that I would recommend is kind of creating admin functions like SQL functions and exposing them as GraphQL mutations. And then just using request transforms to actually call those GraphQL mutations back into Hasura, right? So you can have a GraphQL mutation to like clean up events, or a GraphQL mutation to like an admin mutation to refresh materialized view. And these are admin only. And what you can do with a cron trigger or an event trigger is kind of just call those mutations again. And now, because it's a GraphQL mutation, you're not running raw SQL, you're actually calling a SQL method. So it's parameterized carefully and stuff like that. So as you kind of get into those use cases, that option becomes possible. So we'll share these in the descriptions for the call so that you folks can kind of take this for a spin as well. But there's all sorts of cool things that become possible by just being able to call Hasura back from Hasura itself with either event triggers or with run SQL. For example, if you're using Hasura's caching, you can use event triggers to invalidate the cache with the event trigger directly, right? So that kind of starts becoming possible with request transform. So we'll start doing a few examples of that. Cool. So that's on the event trigger side. What I'll do is, while I have the floor, I'll also quickly just cover some other product updates of stuff that's been happening over the last month or so, and then I'll hand it back to Jesse and Solomon to talk about some enhancements to the query templating language itself. All right. So first on GCP, Hasura Cloud, as you would have heard, as folks might have heard, is also now available on Google Cloud. So this is on 3 regions. So I think Frankfurt, Iowa, and another region that's available in the US too. So I think US West Central and Frankfurt. So this is available on request. We've also introduced dedicated VPCs that are now available on request. So if you want a dedicated VPC, peer that to your systems, just reach out to us and let us know, and we'll be able to switch that on too. So that's on the Hasura Cloud side. A few important updates on the BigQuery and SQL Server side. A bunch of enhancements on BigQuery's improvements to aggregations so that they support joins as well now. Support for distinct on for the BigQuery GraphQL API. For SQL Server, upserts are finally in, which is awesome. Upserts are a little bit different from the way it works in Postgres, but upserts are just always a very useful thing. So a slightly different syntax, but a kind of very useful capability again. And some other improvements that you'll see in the changelog. So if you're using BigQuery SQL Server, please do give that a spin, let us know. Some of the SQL Server mutations features do have to come into the console on the data side, I think, but otherwise the feature is already available on the GraphQL API or is already merged in the GraphQL API. On our restified endpoints in generating the kind of Swagger specification automatically, or the Open API specification when you're using the restified endpoints feature to create REST endpoints from Hasura instead of GraphQL endpoints directly. Some enhancements there that have landed as well. Support for request and response bodies in the schema, improved kind of some bug fixes and improvements on the way path segments and aliases show up in the Open API spec as well. So you should be able to try that out too. So those are kind of some key enhancements there. I'll also talk a little bit about some really cool work that we have in progress. And so you can kind of subscribe to that issue as well. So we've been working over the last few weeks along with a few users and on kind of improving the speed at which Hasura, the query that Hasura generates along with permissions for RLS. So Hasura's permission system is very similar to RLS, which Hasura implements inside Hasura's layer instead of using the database's RLS system, which may or may not be available depending on what flavor of Postgres you're talking to or what database you're talking to. One of the problems that we noticed was we kind of relied on Postgres' query planner to deduplicate permission filters that were coming in, right? So let's say, for example, you had, you were querying a parent and a child. So you were querying, let's say, authors and their articles, right? And the permission rule was that author can be read by the author, but article can also be read by the author. So what would happen is that the permission rule would be duplicated across the author and the article models, and the Postgres planner would not kick out that duplicate permission rule, right? It would apply that predicate again, right? So the work that we've been doing is in kind of removing those duplicate predicates, right? So that the query that's generated is a lot more efficient. And from kind of some of our initial work, this has a pretty massive impact, because in a lot of scenarios, you'll notice that your permission rules have a pretty heavy overlap with the relationships that you already have to, right? Especially if you're following like a viewer model for kind of what your schema is starting to look like. So amazing enhancements there. One of the cool things is this makes Hasura's RLS, it was already a little bit faster than Postgres RLS. It makes it significantly faster than Postgres RLS because this optimization doesn't happen at the Postgres layer. So this should be awesome. We've had a bunch of issues where people have talked about performance improvements that they've desired with permissions as well. So this is work actively in progress. We'll link you to the issue in the description for the community call so that you can subscribe to it, and you can track progress over the coming weeks as we work on it. We're doing a first pass on this, and then we're doing a second pass on this that is a kind of more generic way to optimize the query. But we're doing a first pass on the optimization that will take care of a few of the basic scenarios that we've seen often. So that's been some of the cool work in progress. With that, I'll any questions that you folks have, happy to see on chat or on the live stream. And otherwise, I'll hand it back to you, Jesse, for some updates on Prettyline.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions that maybe I think we'll just bunch them together towards the end, a couple on general product questions. So they're a little bit potentially out of flow, but we will work with that when we get there. Without any further ado, we're going to then move on to Solomon, who will be presenting about the updates to Prettyline, which is a project we have here at Hasura. And Solomon, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over to you.
Hi, can you hear me, Jesse?
Yep, we got you.
Great. Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Oh, or host disabled screen sharing. Can you enable that for me?
I can, yeah. Should be able to go ahead and do it.
Still not enabled. So it still says disabled participant screen sharing.
Try it again. I may have had a mouse fail.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, that looks like it worked. Okay. Can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Great. So hi, my name's Solomon, and I'm on the Cloud API team at Hasura, and I also I guess I'm like the lead developer on Pretty, which is our JSON templating language that we've implemented for webhook transforms. And Pretty is kind of an interesting language because unlike most templating languages which operate on text, Pretty is really built around, it's an expression language that's built around JSON specifically. So any valid Pretty template will always evaluate into valid JSON, which is kind of like a nice property to have for our application. And it's, I mean, you've all seen it, so you've seen some examples of it already, but I was just gonna go over really quickly the basic syntax and then show a few of the newer things that we're working on. But it's it's meant to be very small. You have just basic, it's a superset of JSON. So you've got all JSON terms, plus you've got these like Pretty terms, which are sort of quoted in double curly brackets. And they are, you can do path lookups on objects and arrays. You can loop over arrays. You can do conditional statements, if then else with some predicate operations, and there's a few more than that now. There's string interpolation, and there's string interpolation, and like this is sort of like what's currently available, but and there's I guess it's not on here, but there's also there's a function for escaping strings for doing URL templating, but I can find the pull request for that to show you in a second. But what we've been working on is a few features to help with webhook transforms. Specifically, this is something from JavaScript optionals, or JavaScript style optional chaining, which, so like normally when you're doing a path lookup in Pretty, if an object is, if you're doing a lookup on some field in an object and the field doesn't exist, it's going to throw an exception. In JavaScript, you get an undefined. In Pretty, we don't have undefined as a first class value, so we just throw an exception. And that's, that's fine if you have like a really solid understanding of, if you have a solid guarantee about the schema from your API. But oftentimes with the web, that's not necessarily the case, and you can have different, there's optional terms that can come in over the inner schema, and there's various reasons why it might not, the shape might not be precise. So with this optional chaining feature, which just looks just like the optional chaining in JavaScript, wherever you use it, if the field, in this case bar, is not bound, if it's undefined, then rather than throwing an exception, we just short circuit the entire path lookup and return a null value. So it doesn't matter what is past that point, and it won't throw an exception at that point. It'll just give you a null. So that way, then you can use that with in a kind of a verbose way with an if statement to have like a basic defaulting behavior for if a field is missing. There's an example of that right here, where bar is undefined. If bar is undefined, then we'll just default to null and perform the conditional statement without throwing an exception. So this is there's a pull request for this feature right now. It's not been merged yet, but that should be coming in pretty soon. And then another upcoming feature that we're talking about and working out the details on to sort of go with this is also kind of borrowed from JavaScript. That is, I mean, in JavaScript they call it the nullish operator, but that the semantics of that operator are really specific to JavaScript and how it handles undefined versus null. But so really, I mean, I should rename this document, because really what's going on here is it's a sort of defaulting operator. So if you use this operator on a null value, it yields you the value to the right. And if you use this value on a non-null value, then you just get that value back. So what this means is that with the optional chaining, that means you can do a path lookup, and then if the field is undefined in your object, then you can have a default value other than null. And it's associative, so you can chain these things along, and there's other little tricks you can play with it. But between the two of them, that'll allow you to do things like check if a certain session variable is in scope, and then if so, put it in your query parameters. Otherwise, put something else in your query parameters, or don't put anything in the query parameters, or whatever it is. So we think like this is going to be like a pretty useful tool. I mean, or the combination of these two is going to be pretty useful. And other than that, there's been some work on sort of improving error reporting, and so which should make its way downstream into the user interface of webhook transforms in terms of like more clear errors and explanations of what's gone wrong. And I think those are the main large new features. We added a bunch of like more predicate operations, like so now you can check like object and array membership using kind of like a Pythonish syntax, I guess, and just some more just some basic predicate operations that you would expect to have in any programming language. And we're also sort of, we're thinking about the syntax a little bit. And this is sort of nothing set in stone yet, but the one nice property that we like almost adhere to, but don't quite adhere to, is that any critty term is always quoted in these like double curly brackets. So you can always clearly distinguish between what is like actual JSON and what is an extension of JSON that will then evaluate into JSON. And the only exception is the loop in the if statements. So we use the double curly brackets in a kind of different way here, because you see the whole term isn't quoted in them. Instead, it's like you've got a declaration, a beginning and an ending declaration using them in both cases. And so we're thinking about if it's maybe worth sort of improving the symmetry of the syntax to sort of like, and how that might like improve clarity of understanding these templates, and also like how that would affect like implementation details. But this is all kind of anything like that, any breaking change like that would be like really well defined before it would go through. And we're like my only point of bringing this up is that we're still kind of working out some of the finer details with this language, but it's pretty much the basic operations and the principles of it being like a really simple, easy to use expression language that is embedded in Hasura that's kind of the core idea here. And we're just trying to find the best way to make that happen at the moment. But also we're like highly open to feedback from users. We would love to get any sort of comments on what you like or what you don't like about either the features that it has, or the syntax, or features that you wish it had. Anything like that would be really helpful, because this is for you guys. So yeah, thanks. That's about everything, unless there's any questions.
We didn't actually get any specific questions, but one person did say that it looked amazing and that was exactly what they were looking for, even for another project. So definitely take it, stretch the boundaries, and see what you can do with that. Thanks, Solomon, for that demo. It was really great. Creedy, it really does enable a lot of power features between event transforms and action transforms. It's really going to be an incredible utility for expanding what you can do inside of Hasura. So super excited about that. We're now to our community demo for the day. This is from Hossein Yousefi, and we have a demo on Identi and how they built that with Hasura and Flutter. And I have to say, I've done, I think, 2 hello worlds in Flutter, like at major version intervals. So I'm super excited to kind of see how that development path looks. And without any further ado, Hussein, take it away.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. It's Hossein. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Identi. Identi is a social network for habit builders. And I'm really excited to be with you today to share some of the stuff that we've been doing with Hasura and Flutter. So let me know if you can see this.
Looks good.
All right. So let's continue. These are some of the screenshots basically I have here from the app. The kind of story behind this app was I was kind of in this place with one of my friends, and he was just kind of like talking about how it's very cool if the advice that we are kind of getting on the internet about various things could be really actionable. So like this guy is doing this habit and that guy is doing that habit, and we are kind of just bombarded with all of these different information. However, we are not really doing anything about it. And so we identified a couple of problems. We realized that having an accountability partner, being around other people, where your action is kind of the behavior that everyone is doing, being a part of a tribe, that can really help you actually cause change in yourself. So that was 2 years ago, and we've been kind of creating this social network ever since. You can see here that we have different features. Obviously, we are kind of based on a habit tracker, but we are going way beyond a normal habit tracker. We have feed of activities. These screenshots are a little bit older. We have activities. Basically, each time that you check in a habit, you can also add in photos to that check-in. You can add one of your friends as an approver. If you're likely to cheat, for example, on a habit that you want to implement, you can just ask your friend to become an approver on that habit. And if you don't send a photo proof, it will not register as a correct check-in. So there are kind of interesting stuff like that. And you can see here, there's send proof to accountability partner, like ride my bike, and I send a photo to show that I really did that. We have video lessons from experts and coaches. We have tribes and all sorts of different stuff. You can kind of get a glimpse of what are the different things here. We have different like specific goals for habits, different sorts of progress sharing. Do we want this habit to be a private habit? Do we want it to be only for followers, public? Different reminders, a specific goal. Do we want us to do this daily? Do we want us to be kind of, I don't know, 5 times a week or whatnot? So all of these different features. Starting with the MVP, we quickly realized we really need a powerful tool in order to realize all of these different features, having to have the feed, having to have these different permission setting, this different progress sharing, and all of these different kind of scenarios that we have. We really needed to have a good database, a good likely relational database. So I literally just Googled, okay, I like GraphQL and I like Postgres. Let's use those. But I don't like to write my own resolvers necessarily. So I Googled Postgres and GraphQL, and the first term was Hasura, and I was hooked ever since. I immediately called my co-founders. I'm like, I found the tool that we are going to be using. So this was like maybe the first month of ideating about this. So I've been using Hasura ever since. So it's been almost 2 years from kind of the version 1 and now with the version 2. So our tech stack is as follows. We've been kind of working on the very, very first version. I started using some sort of like a Firebase Firestore as well. We quickly got to the point that kind of dealing with kind of a NoSQL database, especially Firestore, was not really the great fit for us. However, we still wanted to use the Firebase auth, so we kind of kept using that. Then using JWTs, we are kind of connecting that to Hasura plus Postgres. At the time we were using, there wasn't even another option for Hasura, but I'm glad nevertheless, because Postgres is the best. I'm not biased. And also Flutter. So we chose Flutter because, again, the same reason that we chose Hasura, we wanted to be very fast-paced. Really, the speed of development, kind of developing all of these features was really, and also putting it for both iOS and Android was really important for us. Other than these, we have other things, of course, in our tech stack that we are using, other third-party APIs like Stripe, Stream. We are using Stream for chat, things like that. All right, next. Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about what is our Hasura workflow. So this wasn't always the case. We kind of started just having a single because I was the only one was developing this initially. So we started obviously with just a normal Hasura instance and tinkering about it, kind of creating the MVP there. Quickly, we got to a point that, oh, well, there are different people now that they want to kind of be working on probably different features. So we had to create different flavors. And the style that we're going with is that we have all of our different things that we do inside a kind of a big monorepo. Here you can see that we have, for example, the app folder for our application, and we have the Hasura folder, also Firebase there for some of the cloud functions. Really enjoying this dev staging prod kind of flavors that we have, because this really allows us to be working kind of very fast on the app dev with having different basically environmental variables between them, different Docker composes for each one. Obviously, each branch can have its own metadata, can have its own migrations, can have its own seeds. So it's it's not going to kind of be annoying for another developer that, oh, why did you do this? And now my workflow is broken. So all of that is a very nice thing to have. We also use this testing technique that kind of works for us, that we are not really kind of big on unit testing absolutely everything on Flutter, but rather we are kind of doing more of these end-to-end tests. And the way that I'm doing this is I'm going to probably show you in a little bit in a slide from now exactly the way that this is set up. But the gist of it is that we basically test all the way from Postgres and Hasura that are kind of real instances on Docker to the actual Flutter. So we actually run the Flutter test, and we see that Hasura and Postgres are actually working. So that has been working very good for us. We can actually see if the real thing works or not. Next, I also want to talk about the workflow, the package we are using basically for Flutter. Usually we were using other packages. This package is kind of a new one, and by new I mean like we've been using it for like, let's say 1.5 years, something like this. This package is just like basically miles ahead of the previous things that we used. It's really nice because it is kind of like Apollo if you're coming from like a JavaScript world. It generates all of these Dart types, obviously for Flutter, from the schema. It also kind of generates all of the immutable data types for queries, for mutations. And then you can use these fragments to read and write specific fragments of data within the cache. So really easy to handle even very complex caching situations. And for normal stuff, the optimistic caching just works perfectly. So if you have a normal mutation, say, I don't know, I mutate this, this text from A to B, just by providing that optimistically, we expect everything to work. So the result is going to come like, this is the type name, this is the ID, and this is B. It's going to kind of immediately update the cache. And for things that are a little bit harder maybe to do, say if someone likes a photo and then maybe somewhere else the total number of likes is going to change, and we don't necessarily want to return that through the mutation result, we could still kind of write our own cache handlers, very easy to do pagination, very well written documents, also just very easily extensible because it's been written as different type links, and you can just chain anyone that you like. So I highly recommend, if you're using Flutter, to give this one a shot. You can just Google it or look it up on pop.dev. Next, we have just some, I just wanted to make this talk maybe a little bit also useful outside of the just the demo. So I added some more slides. We are using Firebase Auth, as I mentioned. So we've been facing some of the issues trying to get everything to work together between the auth emulator, the storage emulator, and Hasura. Kind of the problem is mostly with Firebase Auth that locally it does not really sign the JWT. So you, as you see, like the JWT has kind of like some sort of a string, then dot, and another sort of a string, then dot, and then the third part, which is the signature. So it kind of stops at the second dot there, doesn't have the signature, it doesn't sign it. Hasura, there's an open issue, I think, for the fact that it does not yet have a type none kind of encryption for the JWT. But there is a workaround, which we could still use the HS256 and then just sign it with the same secret key in our dev flavor and also in the Docker Compose. So that's the kind of thing that we need to do. For the other things, everything kind of just work as usual if we do this. All right. Next, I wanted to also finish this talk off by talking a little bit more about the CI/CD. We are using GitHub Actions for the CI/CD and also some CodeMagic. CodeMagic is a good website for Flutter. For kind of building Flutter has a lot of kind of ready stuff, so we kind of use that as well. Not really including that here. Mostly the Hasura WordPress is entirely on the GitHub Actions side. So basically for testing, what we are doing is that here on GitHub Action, we are just creating the images for Postgres and Hasura, as you can see. So here I'm using Postgres 13 and Hasura 207. And just setting all of the environment variables and everything, installing Flutter, installing all of that, obviously, and installing Hasura CLI, and basically applying all of the migrations, metadata, and seed data to basically run those end-to-end tests that I've been talking about in the previous slide. And then we are just kind of randomizing the tests and running them. So these were some of my kind of select experience with Hasura, and yeah, we've been loving it, and I'm just curious to see what else you have for me. If you have any questions, you can just reach out to me also through this email address that I have up on the screen. This Monday, we are also launching on Product Hunt, so I don't know, pay us a visit there. So thank you.
Thank you. That was great. It's it's a very interesting build pipeline, and it was great seeing another case where some of Hasura's features just allow you to adapt and adopt to the way that you build in a different tool chain, and then it just kind of works the way that you would kind of hope it did. It doesn't force you to change the way you already want to build. So really great. We are just going to be a little bit closer on time after all, so I'm going to go ahead and move on, but thank you so much for the presentation. You can also find Hussein on our Discord if you have any questions for him there, and do go smash that like button on Product Hunt when we launch. You said it was next week, Monday?
Yeah, Monday, January 31st.
All right, so it's two people. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll just wrap up the end of the call here with a couple of little announcements and things as we do. So let me go ahead and grab this one there. So you should now see my slides. So a couple of updates from our side. I wanted to just remind everybody and invite everybody to the Hasura Data and API show. It is a weekly show that we're doing. We're going to be adding a lot of new features this coming year as well. But this happens every Tuesday, and it's really a fun place to come, ask questions, and just see some of the fringe use cases, or even some of the more popular use cases of how people build with Hasura these days. It's a fun one, and it's pretty open to people who would like to be on there. So if you have questions or you'd like to join it, definitely feel free to reach out to myself as well. I'm Jesse at hasura.io, and we can see about bringing you on the show if you've got something to show. So that's the Hasura Data API show. The next thing we have is the recent events. So we saw tonight the nested action types, and we also saw the REST connectors in general. We recently had a webinar on that. You can find the recording for the webinar if you go to the URL there. If you also go to our events page, you'll see it in the past events, but that's available if you have more questions about how that works. Definitely check that out. And an upcoming workshop. This is a bit of a monster. This is going to be a 6-hour-long workshop, start to finish, A to Z. How do you start a Hasura project locally, deploy it to cloud, CI/CD, setting up actions. It's going to have the works in it. It is unfortunately hosted by myself. So if you're okay with listening to this for 6 hours, then that is the place for you if you want to kind of see building with Hasura in 2022. It is a free workshop. It is hosted by AgentConf. And so definitely check that out if you would like to have a very long day. So bring the coffee, because I will definitely be bringing that myself, and we'll have a lot of fun with that one. Our next community call is going to be on February 24th. So don't miss these. We're going to send out more reminders even this next month. Something that we really find a lot of value is having these repeat events, repeat community touch points with you all to be able to show you what we're working on, what's in flight, getting some early feedback. It's a very core part of our ethos here at Hasura. So sign up for reminders on those. If you have any feedback, do let us know, things that you like, things that you didn't like. We would love to hear more. I've got 2 polls to drop on you all here on the last slide as I say thank you. That would be great if you could just respond with a few little tidbits. I haven't actually launched a poll before with this, but I'm going to try and see if I can trigger this. I'm going to launch the poll here, and it's just a couple of questions that we have for how you like working with these community calls. It'd be great if you could just let us know. So we'll leave that up here for a few minutes while I say thank you again to all the presenters that we had today. We really appreciate the amount of time that goes into it, both internally as well as from our community. Hussein, I gave you I think a day's heads up for presenting on this one. I saw the app. I'm like, oh, we've got to have that in there. So really appreciate you being flexible on that. That was great. And if you have something you're building with Hasura, let us know. Post it in the Look What I Made on our Discord channel. Discord is the place where we have a lot of our community chat as well. So post things there and let us know if it's something you would like to demo or present at one of these calls. And I think we did have a couple of questions that had surfaced within the chats. Most of them around, one of them around Relay. Relay support is something we still are working on building out more and more. If there's a specific tutorial that is you're looking for on that, do let us know. I'd say on a GitHub issue, that'd be a great place for us to track that. And then another question was about Hasura support for SQL transactions. That is, so I believe you can hide those behind, you can expose those inside of Hasura, but I'm thinking that a better use case from what you're describing would probably just be using the built-in GraphQL functionality. Maybe raise that question on Discord and we can help you out there. So I think that's going to be it probably for the questions. I'm going to close this down in just a few minutes for the poll as well. Thank you once again to everybody for coming out today, and we will see you all at the next community call. Thanks again, and have a really great rest of your day. Bye.